What's good, everyone? It's your boy Nati again with another video for the channel. Welcome back to DMV Sports Zone. And this week I'll actually be starting off a mini-series where I'll be breaking down the Redskins roster, analyzing each one of the position groups, player by player. And today, I'll actually be starting off with the wide receivers. So without further ado, let's go.
I know myself far too well to be a stranger of pain. Despite it all, we remaining the same. I'm just changing the game. Heart pure, never tainted with fame. Straight ahead, I'ma stay in my lane. Never switching courses, life's amazing. It's gorgeous.
So I can't really start discussing the Redskins receivers without mentioning the Emmanuel Hall news that went down late last week. Emmanuel Hall being a second-year undrafted wide receiver out of the University of Missouri who put up about 1,400 yards and 14 touchdowns in his last 2 seasons in college. And he didn't sign with us right away, right? He signed with the Bears as an undrafted rookie free agent first, and then was ultimately waived, and then was picked up again by the Bucks on their practice squad, and then was released once again, and then eventually found himself on the Redskins practice squad towards the latter half of last season. And as many of y'all are probably aware of by now, he suffered a torn left Achilles during some offseason workouts last month, and he was pretty much going to vie for that 5th or 6th receiver spot for us, but obviously will not be able to do that with that major injury that he suffered just last month. And now we still have a bunch of young, unproven players at the position who probably vie for those same 2 spots that Emmanuel Hall would probably have competed for. So it's not too big of a loss, but at the same time, it sucks for a young receiver, in the league to suffer such a major injury. And now for the actual breakdown of the Redskins receivers on the roster to this point, I'll obviously start with the starters. And with the starters, I'll talk about our wide receiver 1 this year, Scary Terry McLaurin. And Scary Terry last year was a 3rd-round pick out of The Ohio State University. Coaches didn't really expect too much out of him last year. They expected more of a special teams player who could return punts, return kicks, be a really good gunner. But obviously, he was much more. He came out the gates really fast as a rookie receiver, putting up 900 yards, 7 touchdowns on 60 catches in only 14 games because he was injured for 2 games last year. And he was beating up against some of the best corners in the entire NFL last year. He beat up a lot against Darius Slay when we played against the Lions at home. He also beat up against arguably the best corner in all of football right now, Stephon Gilmore. And he would have put up even more impressive numbers if it weren't for unsteady quarterback play throughout most of the season, because we did have that QB carousel for much of it until Dwayne Haskins really took a hold of that job towards the end of the last season. So I see really big things out of Scary Terry this year as our wide receiver 1 once again, especially with an improved Haskins. And I'll break down the quarterback a little bit more, the quarterback position a little bit more in my next video soon to come. But I think with an improved Haskins and Scary Terry just already having a year under his belt, I think he'll have an even more impressive year this year, breaking the 1,000-yard threshold pretty easily and also having double-digit touchdowns. So I think it will be a great wide receiver 1 for us again this year. And then with our starting slot receiver this year, Steven Sims Jr., I think he ended up being a solid undrafted rookie for us last year. Towards the beginning of the season, he was played more so as a offensive gimmick. He had a lot of end-around runs and was sort of involved in the screen game, but was more so involved in like the kick return game. But as soon as Trey Quinn got injured and was, to be honest, just ineffective overall, and Jay Gruden got fired, Steven Sims pretty much took a hold of that slot receiver position and never really looked back. Like, he had, especially towards the end of the season, he had 230 yards and 4 touchdowns in only 4 games. And while those numbers might not be the most eye-popping, he pretty much produced, and we saw a lot of his sudden quickness, and even while not being really fast, like he ran a 4.6 in the 40-yard dash at the combine, he showed a lot of that quickness, a lot of that burst. That is definitely what we're looking for out of our slot receiver position. So I think Steven Sims, continuing the ascension that he had towards the end of last season with an improved Haskins, who again I think will improve even further this year in his second year. I think Sims will just continue being a reliable slot receiver for us, and will likely be our slot receiver for the foreseeable future. And now who I think will be our wide receiver 2 this year and was our wide receiver 2 for a good part of last year, Kelvin Harmon. Even though I and many others thought that he would have been a 3rd round or 4th round pick at worst in the 2019 NFL draft, he ultimately got picked up in the 6th round by the Redskins and was a pretty good player for us last year. Even while being thrown into the fire last year with the coaching turmoil, the quarterback carousel, and us pretty much just not winning games last year, he became a solid possession receiver for us. And he bailed out Haskins a lot of times on 3rd down with a lot of clutch catches, a lot of one-handed catches. And I think, like Sims, he'll only continue to ascend. And he pretty much, his numbers actually last year, while not that impressive with 300 yards receiving, he basically started playing really well once Haskins improved toward the end of last season, much like Sims. And we really got to see that Haskins-Harmon connection, which actually goes further back than the Terry Dwayne connection that was established at OSU, as Kelvin Harmon and Dwayne Haskins pretty much grew up near one another in New Jersey and actually played football with one another growing up. And I think once their connection on the professional level just continues to grow this year, I think he'll become an even more reliable receiver for us, really reliable possession receiver for us. And I think Kelvin Harmon will be an okay wide receiver 2 for us this year during the semi-rebuild, although someone who I think will be a backup for us but will likely play a pivotal role in our offense is Antonio Gandy-Golden. And Antonio Gandy-Golden, or AGG, was labeled as one of the steals of the draft this year, especially at the wide receiver position. And the Redskins pretty much got him out of the 4th round from local school Liberty University. And he pretty much gives the Skins something they were lacking last year. Really good build at 6'4", 220. And even though he's not the most precise route runner, he will likely improve in that area with some great coaching on the professional level. And he really gives us a deep threat down the field who can bring down those 50-50 balls. And we saw a lot of those catches, at Liberty University. And I think AGG could really compete with Harmon for that wide receiver 2 spot. Although with the shortened off season, right, with the pandemic going on and no OTAs, no rookie minicamp, nothing except for maybe training camp at most, I think AGG will play a pivotal role for our offense, but I think he won't be that starter, at least right away, just because Kelvin Harmon has that experience over him. And in this short offseason, a lot of teams are looking for that experience when it comes to picking what players to start in their offense. So while I see AGG offering us more potential and being a wide receiver 2 for us in the foreseeable future, especially if we don't go after a veteran receiver in free agency or pick up another receiver in the draft, with the current circumstances, I kind of see him once again as being a solid backup for us and being a part of the core 4 receivers that we'll primarily use this season, but I just don't see him as a starter right away. And now with some other solid backup players that we have at the receiver position. So we have Cody Latimer, right, who's another big body receiver at 6'3", who most recently played for the Giants last year, but had pretty little production behind Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, and up-and-coming rookie Darius Slayton. And we technically still have Latimer, but he does have several serious assault charges pending against him right now. So I can see the Skins cutting him during training camp or right before the season. But if we do decide to keep him, I think it'll be okay veteran depth for us, who would primarily just be relied upon in case of injuries. If our wide receiver position was ravaged by injuries this year, or if players, God forbid, got the coronavirus or something, I think he could pretty much give us a spot start or 2, but I don't see him as anything more than that. And then Trey Quinn, who is a 3rd-year slot receiver for us after being drafted in the 2018 NFL draft out of SMU. He was Mr. Irrelevant, right? The last pick in the draft. And while he manned the slot receiver spot for us for a good year and a half, he was pretty ineffective last year and had a pretty dud 2019 season. And obviously that led to Steven Sims sort of manning that slot receiver spot. And but I do think Trey Quinn does offer some upside and could be a good backup for Steven Sims out of the slot. But I could just as easily see him being cut during the preseason or maybe during training camp, just because we have several receivers ahead of him right now. And again, he was pretty ineffective last year. Then we have Cam Sims, a third-year undrafted receiver out of the University of Alabama, who is another big receiver at 6'5", 220. He had a couple of nice catches for us the last 2 years, but I mean, he played a pretty small role in a depleted receiving core. So I think that tells you a lot about how, the organization sees him in terms of like their current and future plans. So I think AGG this year will pretty much take up the role that many were envisioning Cam Sims would last year and the years prior. I think it will definitely be tough for him to make the 53-man roster this year, especially if Ron Rivera decides to go with a max of 5 or 6 receivers this year. And then we have Isaiah Wright, who I might shock some casual Redskins fans when I say this, but I actually see him as having a legitimate shot for the 5th or 6th receiver spot this year after being an undrafted rookie out of Temple. And he showed some real explosion over his career at Temple. I watched some of his highlights, and he does provide some upside that I really like. And I think he has a shot on the roster this year, especially because in the last 2 years, the Redskins have had an undrafted rookie receiver who's come into training camp, come into the preseason, and ultimately made the 53-man roster, with Cam Sims in 2018 and Steven Sims last year. So I think Isaiah Wright does have some potential in making the roster based off of purely that point. But again, I think he does offer more upside based off his talent and his production in college, and I can see him being a nice backup for us. But it will definitely be an uphill battle for him just as an undrafted rookie receiver who, rookie receivers oftentimes actually face the steepest learning curves out of any position in the NFL. And when you combine that with the current conditions with the global pandemic going on and the short off season, I just think it'll be tough for him to make the 53-man roster this year, unfortunately. And then now on to some practice squad candidates or preseason cuts this year. So the first player I'll discuss is Darvin Kidsey, who had a couple nice plays for us in the last 2 preseasons, especially last season with Dwayne Haskins at quarterback during the preseason. But even with those plays, he didn't really show enough to make the 53-man roster in the last 2 years. So at best, I think he would be a solid backup for Steven Sims this year. But I think the likeliest option will probably be him being cut during training camp or during the preseason, just because, again, we have so many receivers above him this year. And then we also have the trio of Jonathan Johnson, Jordan Vesey, and Jester Way. And I see all these young receivers just primarily being quote-unquote camp bodies for us. I don't really think they have a legitimate shot of making the roster this year. Although for Jonathan Johnson, I do think he has some upside, and I saw a couple of highlights of him at the University of Missouri, and he was a great receiver on screen passes and also just a great vertical threat. So I think he does offer some potential there and might maybe push some other receivers on the roster during training camp and the preseason. And then for Jordan Vesey and Jester Way, I think they both have similar builds at like 6'3", 215, pretty big-bodied receivers. Once again, do provide some more size to our wide receiver group. But again, I don't see too much production out of them this upcoming season just because the Redskins have so many receivers on the roster right now. So my overall thoughts for the position, I think the Redskins definitely have a young star on their hands in Terry McLaurin, who will just be a great wide receiver one for us for the foreseeable future. And I think they also have another stud in Steven Sims out of the slot. And I think those 2 players will be really good for us in years to come. And I think Kelvin Harmon and AGG will duke it out for the wide receiver 2 position this year. Although I do once again see Kelvin Harmon beating AGG out this year just because of that experience during the short offseason. But I think both players do provide us some potential over the next couple of years and definitely look to be a part of the Skins' plans over the foreseeable future. But I would like to see another veteran wide receiver added to this group this year. Because the group, despite having high potential, having a lot of talent, it is pretty unproven outside of Terry McLaurin and maybe Steven Sims, but Steven Sims still has a ways to go. And we just don't have really good depth behind the core 4 receivers that I mentioned earlier. So I think a veteran receiver would be a pretty nice fit in our wide receiver group. And I'll be talking a little bit more about some of the veteran wide receiver options available to the Redskins at this point, and why Coach Rivera is so reluctant to sign one of those receivers in a video soon to come this week. So overall, while I don't see the wide receiver group being a strength for us this year, I think the group is capable of doing some good things in 2020 with guys like Scary Terry McLaurin and Steven Sims Jr. manning the top 2 receiver spots for us this year. But yeah, that's all I got for this wide receiver breakdown, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It would be much appreciated. Also hit that notification bell while you're at it. Like I said earlier, I'll have another video later this week discussing some veteran wide receiver options for the Redskins. But with that being said, thank you once again for watching, and peace.
Looking at the bigger picture portrait and I smile wide. Performed a song and the crowd cried. How can I lie? I'm tearing up as I'm starting to stare in y'all eyes. I know that you going through the last month. You're stressing as you hitting